Welcome to the session on the Omnipod 5 system. So what we'll work through is how the algorithm works, the evidence behind the Omnipod 5 system, how at Birmingham, how we set it up and how we educate, and then how to assess a download, and finishing off with putting that learning into action with some case studies. So the Omnipod 5 system, you have got the controller, you've got the pod, you've got the Dexcom G6, and you'll actually need a phone in the UK to operate the CGM or the Dexcom G6 from, so you'll need a phone and a controller. And this is how the communication works in the UK. You have the pod that houses where the insulin is and where the algorithm is, and that from insulin dosing perspective from boluses comes from the controller, and there's a two-way communication where the information for the carbohydrates is sent through to determine insulin doses for meals, but yet the algorithm and the continuous glucose monitoring information is passed from the pod to the controller so you can see what's happening. The Dexcom G6 in the UK is required to be started and alerts and alarms from the phone, so you will need a phone and a receiver. And obviously then the sensor sends the information directly to the pod, where it can then be used to determine the smart adjustments in terms of the adjustments in the insulin doses. Important to note, because there sometimes can be a 5-minute delay, you may experience something like this where you see a 6.1 on the phone and a 6.7 on the controller. It's just because the controller is a little bit behind, but in reality it makes no difference with regards to how the smart adjust works, because importantly, even if these two pieces of kit are not within 6 meters of you, the adjustments by Smart Adjust will continue to happen because all you need is the sensor readings, because the algorithm is within the pod, which is important for things like swimming or children or people who are going off and running off playing football. Away from these devices, the magic will continue to happen irrespective of whether those two pieces of kit are near you. But obviously if you want alerts or alarms or to see what's happening, you will need the two pieces of kit to observe that information. It is a model predictive control where it looks into the future, in this case 60 minutes, and uses various things to determine whether to increase or decrease the insulin, but essentially it's aiming to get to a target level. Here's some of the specifics. So the algorithm is called the Smart Adjust algorithm. Importantly, it looks 60 minutes into the future as to where the glucose level is likely to be, and then adjusts the insulin every 5 minutes. It's delivered via microboluses every 5 minutes, and it has a customizable target with as low as 6.1 and the highest at 8.3. Within the bolus calculator within the controller, it does take into account whether the glucose level is rising or falling to increase or decrease the suggested insulin at meal times or corrections. And importantly, you can do a correction in between meals if it's high, based off the insulin sensitivity factor programmed by the user. Importantly, that insulin sensitivity factor though does not affect how Smart Adjust works in terms of its algorithmic adjustments, only for corrections. So it's important, if you're going to be doing corrections on top of what the algorithm is doing, that those correction factors are up to date. With each new pod activation, the system adapts the insulin delivery based on the physiological needs and the total daily dose, which is called the adaptive basal rate. And when you're out of closed loop mode and into open loop mode, it will use the basal that's pre-programmed. So again, it's important to make sure the manual basal rate is kept up to date, just in case you go back into manual mode. It's better to see how it works in actual pictures. So across the top here, you've got the CGM readings, where in the green is between 4 and 10. And you can see the target level here is 6.1 across the day, which is represented by the thick green line. And obviously you can see when it goes above that, you've got a little bit in yellow. When it goes below, it goes in red. So you can see how the glucose level is moving across the day. On the carbs, very, very important that you know how much the person is entering, and you can see how many times a day they're entering. So this person here is eating at about 11 o'clock, eaten here at 2 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and then before bed. So likely they've had breakfast here. It's either a hypo treatment or they've had breakfast without giving insulin for the meal, and you can see it's gone a bit higher. So this is really useful to understand how the user is entering carbohydrates in, and also the level of specificity. So obviously this person may or may not be counting accurately, 60, 65, 70 potentially. But I mean, if every meal is at 30, then you kind of know that someone isn't really entering a close-ish amount to what they're actually eating. Below that, you can see where the insulin is going in for all the meals. So for example, for boluses, 5.5 units here for the 60 grams of carbohydrate, etc. So you can see where the insulin is going in. You've also then got where the smart adjust is working, and here you can see an automated limited mode where for some reason, in this instance, there's no CGM readings, where it goes back to its usual adaptive basal rate with no adjustments, but obviously within here, you can see it's working as it should do. Very importantly, on the bottom here, you can see where the pauses in insulin happen. You can see where the max delivery is happening. So as the glucose level is drifting low, you can see a pause of insulin delivery, and certainly here when it's going low. And then when it goes high, you can see it's maxing out. So on the first pod, it's 2 times the adaptive basal rate maximum, but usually it's 4 times the max adaptive basal rate. So after that first pod's a little bit gentle, which you want to bed someone in, and after it kicks in after the first pod, you can then go up to 4 times max the adaptive basal rate. So again, the user can kind of see what is happening. And just important to note, as mentioned in the first session, this is expected. Pauses and increases like this are meant to happen all the time. When you look at the day-to-day and intraday variations in insulin requirements for a person, it's not unexpected to see this level of stopping and increasing of insulin. And that's why multiple day injection therapy and standard insulin pump therapy have such a challenge in matching individual person's requirements from day-to-day and also into intraday. Along the bottom here, you've got all of your little legends to tell you kind of what's happening with regards to the algorithm. So you kind of here, you've got an alert. There's a pump alarm here for whatever reason. So you can see if there's situations going on here. You've got little advisory alerts here where obviously someone's got a low alert, for example, at 3.1. Here it will be because of automated limited is on. And again, you've got some nice information here along for that particular day. Time in range 63%, median mean glucose, 260 grams carbs seems completely reasonable for a person who's, you know, a child and young person. If that was up at 500, you would start having eyebrows raised and question marks, for example. And then you can see when it's automated mode, limited mode, and you don't have any instances of manual mode in here. But if you did, you would see it would go yellow for a block, for example. You can see when it's max delivery and when it's paused. So again, this is just one day and you don't make decisions on one day. But obviously when we're looking at patterns, if it was a consistent pattern, for example, that they were going high after these meals, we'd be thinking about the carb ratio. If it was a consistent pattern, they were going low after these meals, we may think it's a carb ratio situation. Maybe you would want to elevate the target level during this time of the day or drop it during this time of the day. So it just allows you to get a view on a day-to-day basis, but you need an overlay of these to be able to actually pick up patterns to make therapy adjustments, or it could actually just be user behavior. You can see here the glucose level is already rising before the carbs is going in. Most likely they've eaten here and bolused after eating. So you can see these things quite nicely on a day-to-day thing. And the thing with these automated insulin delivery systems is now you will find that you'll be talking a lot more about behavioral changes than insulin adjustment changes, because often it is the user's behavior that causes glucose excursions, not necessarily that the insulin doses are incorrect. Obviously you can see here on the handset, you can see where the glucose is in the trend arrow, and then if you press the sensor graph, it just allows the person a 3-hour view of what's been happening in terms of the insulin delivery and gives them that kind of view if they want to see where the algorithm is working. They have the option to be able to do that. Importantly, they will see they're in automated mode here. If that's in blue and in manual, they need to switch that, and if they have any kind of notifications they need to take action on, they will be quite clear there. Nicely, this has insulin on board, so you can kind of see what currently insulin is on board. Make sure people don't get freaked out and they understand the 3.1 units on here is probably because there's 3.1 units of food within their belly, so that they don't end up doing things like thinking, wow, there's 3 units on board here and my glucose is 6.7, it's going to drop, I best pile in the carbs. Clear understanding that actually the insulin on board is usually for food that is yet to be digested and used. Tells you when the last bolus is, just so again, you're really useful parents to see whether their young person is actually giving their insulin at lunchtime, for example, and make sure we don't do things like double dosing of insulin. So quite a useful graphic. Into some of the specifics, you've obviously got the Omnipod 5 handset, works with the G6 at present, licensed for 2 years and over from as little as 5 units up to 200 units a day, and the various rapid-acting insulins. Maximum 3-day pod wear, at which point the pod will start beeping at you and will need to be changed. And obviously there's a consideration for people on very high units of insulin, certainly over 65 units a day, won't be lasting 3 days. You get into over 100 units a day, then obviously you'll be changing every 1.5 days, which has user implications and also financial implications as well. Certainly in terms of the parameters, things that affect the automated insulin delivery system, the aggressiveness of the algorithm is learned from the total daily dose of the last 4 to 5 pods. So essentially the kind of last 15 days worth of insulin will determine how aggressive the algorithm is. It updates the adaptive base rate adjust microboluses every 5 minutes, and the automatic corrections are kind of delivered within this 5-minute microboluses. Obviously you bolus from the handset, not from the pump itself, so you will need to keep this charged and keep this within 5 meters of you or 5 feet of you to make sure that actually you can deliver the bolus. There is no extended boluses, and obviously it uses at meal times the correction factor and sensitivity factor. So if you put in the sensor glucose at a meal time, it will use the program sensitivity factor. So it's important they're up to date, and the carb ratios obviously determine the insulin for meal. What is nice is you have up to 8 segments that you can actually put time blocks in for target values. So for example, if someone's a bit more prone to hypoglycemia during the day, or they have very erratic lifestyles during the day in terms of activity, you could have a tight target of 6.1 overnight, and then maybe a higher target at 7.2 during the day to provide an extra layer of protection. Flip the other way around, if you've got someone extremely sensitive to insulin overnight, not so much during the day, you may need a higher target overnight of say 7.2 and a tighter target during the day of 6.1. And the beauty of having up to 8 segments gives you the flexibility to make sure that the algorithm can just stay into speed with what the person in front of you needs to have. But in reality, you're going to start somewhere, and if you want to get tight control, you start everyone at 6.1, and then you observe over the first few days and the first few weeks as to are there individual requirements for this person, without preempting by putting 1,000,001 time blocks in and making it more complicated than it necessarily needs to be. Adjustable factors, you can adjust that active insulin time, so it goes from 2 hours to 8 hours. We set ours at 3, UCLH set theirs at 2, more aggressive. The shorter you put that time, then that means that if you are going to be correcting in between meals, it will be more aggressive with the corrections it offers. So that is something you can tweak. If you want to make someone's control tighter, you can drop that active insulin time from 3 to 2.5 to 2 hours, for example. And obviously you need to keep your carb ratios and correction factors up to date for meal times. In terms of overrides, what is nice is the activity mode raises the glucose target to 8.3, but very importantly, it actually reduces the aggressiveness of the algorithm by directionally 50%. And that is important during activity and exercise. It just means that if you do go high during exercise, the extra insulin it puts in, not only will it only be aiming for 8.3, it will reduce the amount it puts in by 50%. Also extremely important when people are going out drinking alcohol, if they push their glucose level high by drinking beer with lots of carbs in, for example, having a only 50% aggressive algorithm is extremely important so we don't end up with too much insulin going in. So this is very useful for the activity mode, and you can see that's highlighted in green here. It reverts to manual mode if it loses CGM data or has max delivery for a number of hours, and again you will have a notification to inform you of that and to obviously take action on that, and you will see the information on glucose that you need to link up. Now to some of the data. This is just to show that regardless of whether it's children or adolescents, and these are obviously well-controlled people before going on, so children with the average HbA1c of 7.7, adolescents and adults 7.2, by 3 months and ongoing you get an improvement in HbA1c consistently across the board. But obviously, as we know, children and young people who have more erratic lifestyles are not going to achieve the same level of control as adolescents and adults. So from a time in range perspective, adolescents and adults are going to be getting above 70% time in range, whereas children and young people are not going to be getting 70% time in range. They're going to be more like 65-ish. And that's just due to the nature of erratic eating, snacking, activities, food without insulin, etc., etc. But obviously you can see from baseline going from kind of 50 to 65, as we discussed right at the beginning, is an amazing achievement. It's just important to note that for children, you're not going to be getting the same results as you do for adolescents and adults. This is how we start our children and people at Birmingham. We just use one flat basal rate of about 45 to 50% of their insulin requirements. We set 4 segments for sort of breakfast, lunch, evening meal and supper, and then correction factors accordingly. We either use what the calculator suggests if we're not sure what the person is already on, but generally we'll go with their usual carb ratios if they seem about right, and correction factors. It has automatic calculated max boluses and max basals and low pod insulins, and we set ours at active insulin at 3 hours, but maybe after listening to UCLH we need to cut that down to 2.5 and 2 hours and actually see what kind of impact that has, which would be a positive impact certainly for people who tend to correct in between meals. This is how we educate our children and young people. For the people who can, they obviously select online, they do their pre-education online and set up all their information. Just a special note that setting up the Omnipod ID can sometimes be a big challenge. So if you have families that have language difficulties, you may need to shepherd them through that Omnipod ID by having an appointment with them or getting on the phone with them with an interpreter with Omnipod, because sometimes the details that are entered require a little bit of adjustment. So just a special note on that. But it is nice that it's all linked in and the controller has an automatic upload, so all the data is there online and collected. Therefore, the follow-ups are very easily done at home and virtually. But obviously, the children and young people need a phone, and if there is financial implications for the families, or the families do not want their child and young person to have a phone, then you've got a challenge from that situation. We have got into getting some charitable funds for phones, and what we use them is medical devices. We don't put anything on other than the apps that they need, and they treat it as a medical device, and then the family can decide whether they want that child or young person to actually use it as a phone. You do not need a SIM card to do that. All you need is the Bluetooth functionality to make the Dexcom G6 work. You don't need any internet capabilities. We've also got our teaching guide, which talks you through step-by-step how to onboard someone safely and effectively, and that works well within our team. And then we have the Survive and Thrive guide, which again, main things are carrying charging cables with you to charge the phone and the controllers required. Spare pods, obviously insulin vials and pens just in case you need to give corrections. You're still going to have hypos, and it is beneficial to prevent hypos if you are dropping with only smaller amounts of glucose. Obviously, from a high level with these systems, if there is unexpected highs, and when I say unexpected, if there's someone's above 14 because they've just eaten a chocolate bar and not put it into the system, that's why they're above 14. You don't need to worry too much. But if you're above 14 for a couple of hours or so, even if the ketone's less than 0.6, you're going to have to assume that the pod is not delivering insulin effectively. Therefore, you should change it. Obviously, if ketones are above that level, then you're going to be needing an injection of insulin of 10 to 20% of total daily dose and switch it to manual mode for 4 hours to prevent overdosing of insulin. Important to note, you need to fill at least 85 units of insulin into the pod, and again, changing it every 2 to 3 days is best practice, and making sure that the CGM readings are as accurate as possible, which we'll have a session on later, but calibrating with the finger from a patent finger prick if the difference is more than 20%. Obviously, keeping the supplies up to date is absolutely key, but the standard things remain. Insulin 15 minutes before eating, balanced meals, activity after eating, and then for high-fat meals, just go with your usual. As Francesca says, find out before you fiddle. Give the insulin normally and see what happens. The algorithm might be able to keep up. If the algorithm can't keep up, and you carry on going high, then potentially next time you might need to enter some fake carbs. But if you go low, maybe next time you're not going to need to give all the extra insulin. So again, you can observe and see what happens and make a plan from there. Activity remains the same, making sure getting that activity mode on 90 minutes before, but we've got a full exercise session afterwards to discuss. Our clinic tool offers you, first of all, if you click on this link on our clinic tool, it takes you through to this download assessment tool where we run through how to assess a download in the way that we do it. And it just really walks through things that will affect the algorithm. So active insulin, we've already said, you can make it more aggressive by shortening the time. Obviously, the smart adjust, you can have different time blocks for different times of the day. Some suggested carb ratios and sensitivity factors. Bearing in mind, this clinic tool is an absolute idiot. It only thinks that every person that you see has the average sensitivity to insulin across the day. So use these very, very cautiously if you are going to, only if they're not achieving the timing range and you're worried about their settings. Use your clinical judgment and make sure these are only a guide at best. And obviously keep their background basal rate up to date, which is in this case going to be 37% of this person's total daily insulin, and keep the max basal rates and boluses up to date. And again, working through the assessment step process of, are they in automated mode for more than 90%? Check the time below range, check time in range. Are they following the survive and thrive advice? So I strongly encourage you to now go on the video below. You will see, click and watch the download video. Then, once you've done that, you'll go through the case study, use the clinic tool, use the Survive and Thrive guide, and present to yourself or your colleagues what's their time below range, what's their time in range, what's the time of day where you're focusing on where the glucose issues are a challenge, and then think about the Survive and Thrive questions. Are they following the hypo guidance? Are they following the high guidance? Are they giving insulin 15 minutes before meals? Are they missing meals? All of those things, and then think about potential setting changes you may consider upon negotiation, and then importantly, what you're keeping up to date in manual mode, just to make sure that the system stays patent when you go out of open loop mode. So once you've been through those 2 case studies, you'll have a good idea of how the algorithm works, what you can adjust, what you can have to update in manual mode, and the kind of questions you can ask to support your children and young people or people with diabetes in optimizing their time in range with the Omnipod 5 system. So get the case studies open, check out the download assessment video, and yeah, give it a go.